Christian Austin.
Christian Austin, hi.
Yeah.
My name is Christian Austin. Yes.
Nice. Thank you a lot for coming here and for agreeing to my ask about this weird interview. First question: why are you in Georgia and what are you doing now in Tbilisi?
I came to Georgia with a friend of mine. He's a master baker. He's making pizzas here in Tbilisi, and he's now working on the Christmas market selling pizzas.
And you do the same, right?
I help him sometimes, yes, but at the moment it's not too busy. Christmas was busy, Western Christmas, then Western New Year, then Georgian Christmas. Next week, in a few days, Georgian New Year, then busy. So it suits me. I make some money, but mainly what I do is I just practice playing saxophone and guitar and music at home, which is great.
You brought a saxophone from UK, right?
I brought
You came here from.
We drove from London. And she was built 5 years before Billie Holiday died in 1959. So 1954, Kylworth, New King, tenor saxophone.
Let's go back to, I don't know, 25 or 30 years ago.
Okay.
What was your life like those times?
25, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
it was disorganized. It was disorganized. I was taking a multitude of different types of drugs, from heroin to crack cocaine to smoking weed, and I was in and out of prison, fighting, punching policemen, in trouble on the streets, in trouble in the prison. I was just trouble.
Oh, yeah, troublemaker.
I was a troublemaker.
Oh,
Yes.
could you tell me how did you start doing drugs?
Okay, I think we need to go back to the beginning, really,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
my parents were very dysfunctional. Alcoholic father. My father was gay in the 1960s in the UK, so you could go to prison for being gay.
Oh, awful.
Yeah. So what homosexual men did in the 60s was they marry a woman, they have children, and they end up probably becoming alcoholic through frustrations and stuff. So he was alcoholic. He was physically abusing my mother.
Oh, shit.
He was physically abusing me. And he's one of my first instances of crime was I watched him take the money from the gas meter. He broke open the gas meter, took the money, put the box back, and went out. And then I took the money. I went to the school, and I bought so much sherbet. It was just like just giving sweets out in the playground. And then just because of my situation at home, I became violent in the playground. I was always fighting with children. I was always a problem with the teachers. And at 6 years old, I got caught stealing a bicycle. And ended up in a police station at 7 years old, very, very young. And then this continued for another 5 years. My mother moved from London to a suburb from outside of London, trying to hope it would change me, but it was too late. By then, trouble. So then my mother couldn't control me, and I went to a courts, and the courts just said, okay, well, we're going to put you in what they call care homes. So I was put in with all these other boys. And from 12 years old, I stopped listening to adults, and we taught ourselves, which is not the best role model. 12-year-olds, 13, 14-year-olds teaching each other about life. So we were always running away. We were stealing from cigarette machines, fruit machines, money for food, cigarettes to smoke, because we started smoking at 12 years old. And it just got crazier and crazier and crazier. For 3 years, they can't put you in prison. But at 15 years old, you can go in a young man's prison. Then it's secure and you can't escape. So I went in a young man's prison called Borstal, first time for 13 months. Then I was out for 6 months. Then I was back for 17 months. And then over the next 20 years, I was in prison for 10 years. In and out, just doing drugs.
You just didn't know another life.
That's the only life I knew.
Yeah.
So we were injecting drugs, because this was like when you inject some heroin and you didn't have any love as a child, it's like your natural painkillers in your brain, endorphins, are very similar to opiates. So when you first do heroin, it's like your first embrace. And then from then, it was just like, I love this stuff. Many of my friends are dead now because they injected and overdosed, So many are dead, or many are in prison still doing life sentences for murder. I was very, very lucky that I survived. It's difficult to survive to the point where you actually want to change. My friends never arrived at the point where they wanted to change because they died before then. I was lucky I stayed alive, so 35 years old. By now I had 3 children. I had an 8-year-old son and 18-month-old twins, a girl and a boy. And I looked at my father, who was dead by then. He died of alcoholism and expectedly, alcohol. Then I looked at my father and his life. I looked at my life and I looked at my children and I said, you know what? Cyclically, generationally, this is going to continue unless I do something. So I applied to a drug rehabilitation centre. I'd applied to them 3 times before over the past 10 years, and every time they were just like, you're not ready, you're not ready. Then something in my letter made them realise I was ready. They came to the prison, interviewed me, and I was accepted by the drug rehabilitation. A Crown Court judge, a High Court judge, said, okay, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance. You go there, and if you run away, you're back in front of me or one of my colleagues, and you're getting another 4 years in prison. So this was the best incentive ever. That made me stay at the drug rehabilitation centre for 9 months. And then I moved out of there. I was cured. I moved to a new city, Winchester. Didn't know anyone. And started my life again.
Don't you remember the letter that you sent to this drug rehabilitation?
Yeah, I remember the letter. I was just explaining that.
What was the main point in this letter?
That I'd had enough. I'd had enough of taking drugs and trouble with the police and prison, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. And I mentioned my children and how I wanted to change, and something in the letter, they read it and they just knew. They knew I was ready. And then the interview, this guy called Charlie Fuggle, he came and interviewed me and he said, you know what? You're ready. And I was. Yeah. So then that was 22 years ago, and since 22 years ago, no more heroin, no more crack cocaine. I did another 10 years after that of smoking cannabis, doing ecstasy and snorting cocaine, but no more injecting, no more police, no more violence, no more trouble. Then after 10 years, all the while I was working in the construction industry, and I made it up to assistant site manager in construction. But for the first 10 years, I don't know how I did it. I was tired every day. The thing is, when you're in it, you're in it. So when that's your life, that's your life. And I knew I wanted to change, but I was still having fun. Even in prison, I was still having fun. I was still taking heroin in prison. I was still taking some cocaine in prison, because drugs are in prison in the UK. So everyone was you're still having a life, just no women, no sex, no family contact. So you would just end up making friends, but then it's a dangerous place as well because of the drugs. At one point I had three men in my cell with knives. And because my friend went out on home leave and we owed him drugs to these people, and he didn't come back from home leave. And we were like a team. So obviously he's no longer my friend because he didn't come back, and I end up with 3 guys with knives going, where's our stuff? And I'm like, you can stab me now, or you can wait, and in a week, 2 weeks, I'll give everything back. You know I will. So it was okay. But it's a very dangerous place. I've seen people being stabbed next to me and being cut wide open and really, really bad stuff in prisons. Because it's a dangerous place. In any country, prison is dangerous. But because it was the only life I knew, it's just what I did every day. Until I realised I've had enough. I've had enough of this. That's it. No more. Stop. And then I stopped.
What were your thoughts about your future at those times? Do you remember, did you have any plans?
No plans. No plans.
Future.
No, every day was just steal money, credit card fraud, shoplifting, punching policemen when they try and catch you, and you punch them and run away, because every day all you wanted was to get the drugs. Get the drugs.
And now, could you tell what helped you to escape this destructive circle? Do you remember what inspired you the most? What maybe like
Music.
Okay.
All the way through prison, I learned how to play a guitar. In and out. I was in prison. I was out prison. In prison. Out prison. I was on the festival scene in the UK. Just play, live bands, music. Everyone had a guitar. I learned how to play guitar, a harmonica. I learned piano when I was in the bad boys schools at 12 years old. I learned some piano. So I was always musical. Started playing guitar and singing at 18, 19, 20 years old. And then saxophone came along. And then I played the saxophone, and that was what really blew me. I was just like, right, I want to play saxophone with bands on stage, and which I did. I've done now for 20 years.
Awesome, awesome. Do you remember how you bought your first saxophone? Is it your first saxophone?
First saxophone, okay.
Yeah.
This is funny because every day, I was in prison one of the last times, and a friend had a saxophone in prison, believe it or not, but he couldn't play it. But he knew I was musical. So he said, can you teach me to play my saxophone? And I was like, well, okay. He gave me the book, he gave me the saxophone. I was locked in my cell, playing as quietly as I could, learning stuff, then teaching him, learning, teaching him. That was my first experience of saxophone. So then the next time I was out, I was released and I was free, I kept walking past this music shop and seeing a saxophone in the window. And my plan was, one dark night, I was going to smash the window, take the saxophone, and then I had a saxophone. But I just thought, Christian, that's crazy. Don't be stop being so crazy, man. Stop it. Why don't you just go into the shop and say, here's some money now. I'll pay you a little bit of money every day or two, and then until the saxophone is mine. And that's how I bought my first saxophone, instead of breaking the window. By then, I think I changed a little bit. This is before rehabilitation centre, but coming up to the point where I really knew I wanted to change.
Like the first step.
One of the first steps, yeah. That was exactly in 1995, and it was 2 years later I went to a rehabilitation centre.
Okay, And now I want to ask you about your plans, your dreams, your future. Do you have any?
I have. When we last spoke, I did say I could either become a probation officer potentially back in the United Kingdom, helping people who are in trouble with the police, who are in and out of the courts and the prison system, trying to help them get their lives back on track, trying to get them back on what we call the straight and narrow in English. I'm interested in public speaking. I think I have another TED Talk in March in Cambridge, and in front of 250 people, describing about my life story and the power of the power of change and the ability to be able to change from a life of crime and drugs. A friend of mine near the Pyrenees, on the west coast of towards the western border of France and the border of Spain, has offered me. She and her husband own a retreat, a yoga retreat, a healing retreat, and they've offered me to come and stay there and get free bed and board, and maybe a few hours a day doing handyman skills, electrician, plumbing, carpentry, whatever. And this is very appealing to me because it means I could actually write my autobiography. I could spend maybe 6 months to a year working on my life story, writing a book. Because when I was in Cambridge University, I was there for 18 months, and nearly everybody I spoke to said, you must write a book. You must write a book. And this is one of my plans. I'm sure I'm here for another 50 years on this planet. I was 57 years old last week, so I'm looking at 107 years old, no problem. But there's no harm in writing my memoirs now, and then maybe later on I can write part 2.
Yeah. So you mentioned Cambridge University. Could you tell me how you had known about this university and how you get in?
Getting into Cambridge was actually purely by accident, it seems. I went to Drug Rehabilitation Centre. I was there for 9 months, and when I left there I moved to a completely new city called Winchester in the south of England. I didn't know anybody, and I started working in construction. Over the next, that was in 1998, so over the next 15 years or so, I worked my way up the construction ladder, whilst, working as a construction ground worker or a machine driver. but in my spare time being a musician, obviously, playing with different bands. But I worked my way over 15 years up to assistant site manager. And then in 2008, the financial bubble burst in the United Kingdom, in much of the Western world, to be honest. And my company, they managed to hang on for 4 more years, till 2012, before they went bust. Well, they were bought out by a French company. And at this point, I was made redundant. My partner of 6 years had just finished a university degree in social work. She was helping. She finished her degree and then got a job working in South Wales in Newport's over 65 team, helping old people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And this made me realise that no one in my family had ever been to university, but perhaps I could go to university. I applied to Cardiff University to do a Bachelor of Arts in popular music. I didn't have enough UCAS points, which is what you need in England to get into university, but I had an audition. I applied, I made the application, I had an audition. The course leader was a saxophonist like myself, and in the audition he played Watermelon Man or Cantaloupe, a Herbie Hancock's song on the piano, and said, "Can you play along to this?" Which I did. I played the head, which is what we in the jazz world call the tune. We played the tune, then he improvised a little bit, and then he asked me lots of different questions. And then he said I'd been accepted. So I was accepted in university. This was in Cardiff Uni. The thing about Cardiff University is it's next door to Cardiff Prison. And on my second year, I had to do work experience for my degree. So I confessed to my course leader, the one who'd auditioned me, and I said, "Listen, has there been much interaction between the university and the prison next door?" And he said, "As far as I know, none, ever, none." So I explained about my life story, which I'd never told him previously. I said, I was in prison a lot, and I was on heroin a lot, and I was in one of these places like next door for many years. But I want to go in there and try and help prisoners learn music, teach them guitar, teach them computer music. And he said, "Great, okay, try it." I applied I got in touch with the head of the education department, the learning department in Cardiff University. She arranged me to come in and visit her in her office inside the prison. I went in there and I started teaching prisoners how to play guitar. And from this, my subject for my dissertation on my third year was music programs in prisons, particularly Changing Tunes, which was a Bristol-based music program who were going into a few different prisons, but Cardiff was one of them. So I followed them. I evaluated what they were doing within the prison system. I saw them doing concerts with ex-prisoners in a big church in Bristol, outside of prisoners who'd been released but were still involved in the program. And while reading all the academic papers I had to read for my dissertation, I read one. This one academic paper was called "Fuck It, Matzah and the Desistance Process." And it was pretty much the best paper I'd read out of all the papers I read for my writing my dissertation. And it was basically, the subject of the paper was about how people were released from prison and they've lost their girlfriend, they've lost maybe their family ties, they've lost their place of living, they've lost so much. They've got no money, they're released from prison with maybe 1 week's money in their pocket, which generally they go and spend down the pub or on some weed, because they spend that 1 week's money, and then they've got nothing. And then they're expected, with very little help, to find somewhere to live, to find a job, and to rebuild their lives. And many of them, like myself, so many times I left prison and I said, "I'm never going back. That's it, I'm never going back to prison." And that was my intention. But everything is stacked against you, and try as hard as you might, week after week, month after month, you can't get a job because you've got a criminal record. You can't get anywhere to live because you haven't got any money, because you haven't got to get a job, because you don't have a job. And everything's stacked against you. And there comes a point, weeks or months after leaving prison with the best intentions, where you say, "Fuck it. Fuck it. I've tried so hard. There's nothing happening." So then you go back to crime. And that's what this paper was about. It's the only paper of all of those that I read from my dissertation that I actually emailed the email at the bottom, the email address at the bottom, and said, "This is a really good paper. Whoever you are, can you introduce me to any other papers that are similar to this, because this is just so fantastic. And the address was RA, blah, blah, 3 numbers, at cam.ac.uk. At the time, I didn't realise this was Cambridge University. So I sent the email, didn't know what to expect. A few days later, I get a response saying, "Hi, my name's Ruth Armstrong from Cambridge University's Institute of Criminology. One of my students is also doing a dissertation on music programmes in prisons. Her name is Jasmine, and she sings for King's College Choir and is involved in a programme called Sing Inside. Be in touch." She copied her email in as well. And then she said, you know, exchange information and, you know, meet each other via email and, you know, and also we're having a symposium on music in prisons in maybe 1 month's time. Why don't you come along to Cambridge? So I was blown away by this. I was just like, wow, what Cambridge? Okay, well, great, why not? So on the date of the symposium, I drove 3 hours to Cambridge from South Wales, attended the symposium, met Dr. Ruth Armstrong, who became my mentor, and after the during the symposium, the choir, these girls, Jasmine and the rest of the choir, stood up at the back of the room and just sang this beautiful piece. I don't know, Handel's Messiah or something, and it was so beautiful. I just closed my eyes and listened to it. They sang this piece, and then Jasmine got up and spoke about the programme and the work she was doing in the prison, and then there was a question and answer session, and I asked a few questions, answered a few questions, and at the end I said to Ruth, "Can I grab 10 minutes of your time?" And she said, "Look, everyone here wants 10 minutes of my time, all these people. I've got to go to school and get my daughter. Here's my address, come to my house in maybe an hour. Jasmine will show you around King's College, Trinity College, give you the guided tour, then come to my house and we can talk." Did that. Jasmine showed me around Queen's, King's, Trinity, all these different colleges. Amazing, like architecturally, historically, absolutely mind-blowing. Then I got in my car, drove to Ruth's house. She cooked me dinner and said, "Tell me about your life," which I did. And then she said, "Okay, do well at your degree, and then you can apply to come here to Cambridge, and I'll do a master's in criminology and a PhD in criminology," which is exactly what I did last year. I was accepted. Last year, 2017, 2018 actually, I completed a Master's in Criminological Research with a very respectable score. And then afterwards, believe it or not, because there's college systems in Cambridge, but I wasn't very well off financially. So I had to borrow money from my college, and then to pay back some of the money, I got a job serving food at the college, serving all my friends food, breakfast, lunch and dinner, to pay back some of my debt. And that's how I got to Cambridge. Once I finished my master's degree, then a friend of mine, Dr. Thomas Jeffrey Miley, who's a political sociologist in Cambridge University's sociology department, he invited me to a couple of his seminars and classes to play some saxophone and tell some of his sociology students, about my life story, which I did once, then twice. And during this time, one of his students contacted me afterwards and said, "Listen, I work for Varsity magazine, which is a student-run magazine in Cambridge, and we'd like to do an interview with you." So I did an interview with Varsity magazine, and then one of the final questions was, it's available on Varsity podcast. Maturing with Age, I think, is the title of the interview, or the series of interviews. And one of the final questions Raphael asked me was, "What's next?" And I said, "Well, everyone says I should do a TED Talk, so that's what I'm planning on trying to do." And he said, "Well, that's easy. I know those guys. I'll put you in touch with the TED Talk guys." So he did. They got in touch with me. I had a meeting with Shayna, one of the committee members of the Cambridge TEDx community. And last January, I did a TED Talk to 60 people in Cambridge. This is kind of like it's a small TED Talk, and it's not filmed by TEDx or anything. And but then it's kind of like a precursor potentially to a bigger TED Talk. So when I finished my talk, there were 4 people talking that evening, and Shayna said to me, I was the last one on, and she said, "Told you we saved the best for last," because I got a very good response. And she said, "I'm going to recommend you to next year's committee, and you should be able to do a talk. I'm going to recommend that you do a talk at the main TEDx conference next March." So I think I'm returning from here in Georgia end of February, and I'm optimistic that Cambridge TEDx are going to get in touch with me and ask me to attend and speak at the main conference in March.
Yeah, and now I got two last questions.
Okay, cool.
Could you tell anything about the program that's called Journeyman UK, and if you can advise anything to young people who are stuck in bad places, bad companies, bad behavior, please do that.
Okay, well, I do have a good story about Journeyman UK. This Journeyman UK is a mentoring project in the United Kingdom, and it's where middle-aged to older men mentor teenage boys who come from underprivileged backgrounds, from dysfunctional families perhaps. Maybe their father or their mother's on heroin, or they're alcoholics, or they got big problems at school and at home. And once a week we gather in the woods, build a fire, play some volleyball, play some basketball, whatever, just play around with these guys, and then sit down and let them talk around the fire. And the main thrust of this program really is for them to feel like they've got someone who cares, because maybe in their family environment they don't really feel that they're cared for that much. So I was working with this. It's a voluntary organisation, and I remember one evening, the night before, I was going to talk to these young boys. Before Facebook and Instagram, there was a thing called Friends Reunited, and my sister was on Friends Reunited. I'd never got on it myself, but I was looking at her account, and I saw a photograph from probably when I was about 17, 18 years old. And it was on her Friends Reunited page. And I looked at this photograph, and there were maybe 4 or 5 people I knew in the photograph. I wasn't in it, because I was locked up in Borstal. So I was definitely absent from the photograph. But looking at the photo, I went, well, there's Steve McCarthy, there's Jason Tegg, there's Grant Taylor. There's 3 or 4 people I knew back then who have long since died. And all I wanted to be able to do at that point in time was, I just thought, and I said that to these boys the next evening. I said, I looked at this photograph of these boys, my peers, who are now dead, and what I really wanted to do was to be able to jump into that photograph and go, listen, guys, guess what? The grown-ups, the professional grown-ups, who the courts have allocated to talk to us, or the school teachers, the professionals, maybe not your own parents, maybe not your own uncles or aunties or whatever, but some of these professionals, probation officers, social workers, teachers, they know what they're talking about. Because when you're that age, all of us, you think you know everything. We all know everything. When you're 16, 17, 18, what can grown-ups tell you? Nothing. You know it all. But I wanted to be able to jump in this photograph and say to my peers, listen to the probation officers, the social workers, the teachers. These people do care about your future, and they do care about you. Listen to them. And that's the only advice I could give, really. Just listen to the people, not necessarily the dysfunctional people you're surrounded by when you're a youngster, but the professionals, because they care mostly, and they know what they're talking about. That's the only advice I'd give, really.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty it. Thank you so much again for...
You're welcome. World peace, man. World peace.
Thank you.
Good, no problem.